So I'm super excited that you're joining me today because this is going to be a lively topic. We're going to be talking about sadism in toxic relationships. Actually, sadism in any kind of relationship. What is it? Why does it occur? How to recognize it? I remember thinking I that my partner wanted to hurt me, but I couldn't really believe that someone would do that like that. That it just seemed kind of surreal. Like people don't actually on purpose harm other people. They don't get joy or pleasure or satisfaction from other people's suffering. But the sad situation is that there are classes of people who very much get a lot of pleasure and delight out of your pain, out of your suffering. So let's talk about sadism today. What is cruelty? I want to give a trigger warning to those who are joining that this is going to be a disturbing topic with disturbing themes. So please use your wisdom and your discretion as you tune into this, us discussing what sadism is, what cruelty is in a relationship. If you guys don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I am a retired psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience, and I'm also a narcissistic abuse survivor as well as an abuse survivor. And I'm very familiar with sadism. I actually grew up in a extended family that had um, pathological people. Definitely, I would say probably psychopathic people in the extended family. So I witnessed it personally, watching people's cruelty, but I also experienced being around it and having to manage it. In fact, I blogged about it about 6 years ago. I wrote about what it was like to grow up in a family with psychopaths in it. And I think there was at least maybe 2 to 3 individuals in my extended family that I would say qualified as with psychopathy or sociopathy. It's a it's as a child at any time it's always disturbing, but as a child it's extremely disturbing to grow up around people who intend you harm, who like to see you get upset, like to see you suffer, like to see you get distressed. So let's dive into it. I'm so glad you're here. What is sadism? What is this big term? It is a deliberate, I'm going to read a definition. It is a deliberate act of inflicting physical, emotional, or psychological distress on another person, deriving pleasure, satisfaction, or a sense of power from their suffering. This can manifest through direct aggression, passive aggressive behaviors, or covert manipulation. Unlike mere cruelty, sadism involves enjoyment or gratification in causing pain rather than the indifference or a lack of empathy alone. So what does that mean? What it means is there are people out there. Let's say, for example, you run into somebody who doesn't have empathy and they do something that's harmful or hurtful to you, and you say, "Hey, I don't like that, stop." And they're like, "What? I don't get it." And because they lack empathy, they're not aware of what it would be like for you to experience what you're going through. That's an example of suffering at the hands of someone who's indifferent or just lacks empathy. What happens with sadism is that they know that it's hurtful and harmful, and they're enjoying your discomfort, your distress. That's the difference. There's an intentionality, it's not accidental. It also, there's a deliberate desire to inflict distress or pain. The person derives pleasure or power from your suffering, and it can be covert or overt. So both passive aggressive as well as aggressive. So, how do we as psychologists distinguish sadistic behavior? What we've noticed is that there's what we kind of put into 2 different categories. There's everyday sadism, and then there's pathological sadism. So let's talk about the differences. Everyday sadism is subtle, socially acceptable forms of enjoying other people's embarrassment or discomfort. Let me give you a classic example that you all will immediately be able to identify with, and that is the wedding reception cake in the face moment. That would be what would be considered an everyday example of sadism, where it's culturally accepted. We often know that it's coming. There's even kind of jokes happening at the reception. But anybody who knows the effort that that bride has gone through to look good for that day, and also what frosting with butter in it or any kind of fat in it is going to do to her dress, or her outfit or her veil knows that they're destroying her makeup, destroying her face, and probably ruining that dress so that it is never wearable again. That is that's an act of everyday sadism. It's subtle, but unfortunately, despite the fact that it is not kind, it's rarely awful. We socially accept it, and we kind of, as a group, uncomfortably, I'm really like awkward saying this, we as a group kind of enjoy the bride's embarrassment or discomfort. That's why you see all the cheering and the razzing that goes on behind it. Pathological sadism is extreme or chronic or escalating behaviors that inflict serious harm. And it can be as subtle as here's an example I heard that I thought was really subtle, but is a perfect example, and that is you're with a new partner and the new partner starts to compare you to a past partner. You know, so and so was way better at XYZ. You know, so and so, Roger really knew how to repair my car, and he did it super fast, and he did it without complaint, and he saved me so much money. That would be an example of pathological sadism that's actually very subtle. It's very insidious. Imagine hearing that as a man in a relationship over time. You're going to start to get kind of a complex. You're first of all going to always be aware that you're not quite measuring up to Roger, and you're always going to feel like you're treading on water with this person. And you know that it hurts you, that it emasculates you, but you also feel like you can't really say anything because you look weak for being upset over a comparison over a car repair job. That's an example of pathological sadism that's very covert and very subtle, but still very, very insidious and hurtful. One that happened to me was that, and at the time, I recognized it as hurtful, as a way to get at me, but it seemed so petty that I really didn't know how to, like, what to do with it. I have a lot of allergies, just enormous amount of allergies, and one of them is to soap. So I have to be really careful about not only what kind of laundry soap I use, but also what kind of bath soap that I use. So as a result, one of the things I've found is I have to buy the more expensive stuff like goat milk or organic or the homemade kind, you know, the kind that doesn't have lots of deodorant and scents in it. So I'm living in Mexico, having a hard time finding a supply of these types of soaps because I don't really know where to get them because I'm not familiar with the culture. And the ones that I was buying is quite expensive. Like they can be upwards to $6 to $9 a bar. Well, my ex had a certain kind of soap that he just loved, and we ran out of it. I don't know why, because we usually kept it stocked, but we ran out of it. And I said, here, you can use my soap. And so he used it for several days until we made it to the grocery store and bought more. When we bought more of his favorite type, I said, hey, where's that bar of soap? And he said, I threw it out because I didn't like it. And I knew he knew that it was expensive, that I had a limited supply, and that he didn't know where to get more in the country, that he knew that. And I knew that, and I also knew he knew that I didn't care if I reused his soap. Good grief, you know, we were sharing a shower for a period of time before we used our own bathrooms. So it wasn't like that was an issue. This was an example of him just like sticking the knife at me just to make my life a little more uncomfortable, a little more challenging. That would be an example of another subtle form of sadism. Now we all know the big forms. The big forms that are poking fun at you in front of everybody about something that you're super vulnerable about, and you ask that not to be discussed, and they discussed it anyway, and then they watch you squirm while that happens. Or here's one that happened to a family member. A family member of mine had underwent a massive weight loss, like a huge amount. And when you've been an older person and you've had a lot of weight loss, you have extra skin. And her partner would like to kind of rub the skin and say, you don't like me doing this, do you? And she'd say, no, I don't. It feels weird. And on top of it, makes me feel very self-conscious. And then he would say, but I like doing it. Isn't that enough? And she knew that he was getting pleasure out of her discomfort, to the reminder that she used to be a much larger person and that she had this excess skin that she couldn't afford to do anything with. It was just to sort of, again, like, imagine this person knows how, in just the right way, to stick the knife and really hurt you in a profound way. So let's talk about, here's where I like to go with today. And those of you who are joining me, I'm Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a retired psychologist. Where I'd like to go with today is I want to talk about why people do this, because don't we all want to know that? I'd like to know that. Like, what's going on with people? People are so crazy to do this. And then I also want to talk about some examples so that you can recognize maybe some ways in which it's showing up in your relationship and you're not aware of it. And if we have time, I want to get into what to do if it's happening to you. Because I think that's really, really important to know the steps that you should take to keep yourself safe if this is happening to you. So let's jump into why do people do this? Because it just feels crazy, doesn't it? I mean, I don't, well, I watched that Zelensky and Trump and Vance deal, and to me, that was an example of sadism, honestly, in full display of the whole world, putting this man, you know, it, on the seat for not wearing the right suit when he's in war times, and then not being grateful enough when we have videos of him thanking the United States for our fantastic military support over the years. To me, that's an example of unnecessary cruelty that was deliberate at his expense, that there was enjoyment at his discomfort. So that's one example. So why do people do this? Why do they do that? Well, one, people love to do it for power and control. I know we say that a lot. We say, what's abuse about? Well, abuse is about power and control. But there are some of us who really derive an enjoyment of having dominance of other people, that they just need to be superior or to maintain control. And the great way to maintain control is to remind somebody else that they're less than, that they're not all that. And even better, to watch them suffer and know that you are the instrument of their suffering. I mean, that really is the ultimate experience of control, is to watch the way in which you have power over another person and can actually affect, influence their life. It's a great way to counteract your sense of helplessness or inferiority. Now, I want to say there are people, though, who do not feel inferior. Please don't think that if you have a narcissist in your life, that your narcissist is racked with shame or has deep-seated insecurity. Yeah, there are some that do, but there are a lot of them that just think that they're better than everybody else. They actually believe that they're entitled, that they're privileged, and that the rules don't apply to them. So be careful and watch for that, because we can be pulled in and feel sorry for someone if we think that they're helpless or inferior. Okay, so reason number one is power and control. Reason number two is because of emotional numbing and desensitization. Unfortunately, some people who grow up in families that are extremely toxic, where there's lots of violence in it, over time, they just kind of get used to it. It's sort of the norm. I remember meeting somebody, it was a one date, and I never saw the guy again because he freaked me out telling me this, that he grew up on the border of Mexico, and he had a partner, a friend, who actually trafficked women. And he just was like casual around it. And you're like, well, yeah, that's what he did. I was aware of it. And I was a kid, so I couldn't do anything about it. But he acted so nonchalant. I thought, this guy is emotionally numb and definitely desensitized to the pain of other people. So some people have just been too exposed, and it just becomes a nothing. I think that can happen, for example, when we get into these sort of addictive behavior. I think pornography, for example, is an example of that, where over time you're looking for new novelty and more extreme experiences. So you start to watch like darker and darker stuff, and before you know it, you're into something really, really dark, because watching a person's discomfort over time has gotten kind of bland and not all that exciting. So you start to progress into greater and greater darknesses. So be very careful about your habits, that it doesn't inoculate you to painful behaviors, distressing behaviors to other people. Be very, very aware of that. Some people, this is reason number three. Some people do it as a way to express their own pain. I know that's really weird. It's called a projection of pain. They have been abused or traumatized, and so they reenact that trauma onto other people. That's something that I'm aware of commonly happens with abused kids sometimes, not all abused kids. And hey, I was abused kid, so I hate to have people say things because it wasn't necessarily true about me. I know it's not true about a lot of people, but there are occasionally, I was aware of, for example, my aunt used to take in foster kids, and she would get kids that had a really rough experience, and some of those kids would then reenact that same trauma onto other people because of their unresolved issues, their unresolved difficulties. So be very aware that sometimes hurt people really do hurt people. Okay, reason number four. Some people just like to have other people suffer. There's a word for it. I don't know if I can say it right because it's a German word, Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it means a pleasure derived from other people's failures or pain. So sometimes there's people who actively seek out ability and opportunities to inflict suffering on other people. So be extremely careful of people who seem to just sort of like get off on watching other. Yeah, thank you so much, on my way. Exactly, that's what it is. Get off on watching other people hurt. So let me review what they are. The first four so far: power and control, emotional numbing and desensitization is number two. Number three is a projection of pain. And number four is just out of enjoyment. Number five is out of insecurity and compensation. Some people, and I saw this with my ex, he had a class of people that he hated, and he would talk about them in very disgusting, kind of derisive terms. And I realized that it really was actually a reflection of his effort to compensate and his insecurities. So sometimes you'll see, for example, how many times have you seen somebody who has a particular affliction then run down everybody else in the room who has a similar affliction? It's almost like they don't know they belong to the group, but they'll point out everybody who has that similar issue to them as if there's something wrong with that person, sort of almost like to step on them as a way to elevate themselves. So watch out for that individual. Reason number six, a lack of empathy. There are people who just don't understand how it feels, and they're really novelty seeking. They really like they like new stuff, the rush. And so because of their kind of their indifference and coldness and that need for rush, they'll then act out as a way to sort of get that rush and not be concerned of its impact. Then there's people, for number seven, that it's social learning and conditioning. This would be an example, I think, of people who grew up in a very, like a crime family, or maybe they work for the cartel or some kind of like something like that, where it's just it's the norm. That kind of hurtfulness, stepping on people, just harming others is just the way that business is done or the culture is done. And they learn that that's what aggressive or dominant behavior or masculine behavior looks like. Then number eight is the thrill seeking and stimulation. Like I said, there are people who are just bored and they're flat and they lack any kind of direct kind of excitement in their life. And so they get off on just watching other people get hurt. I often think of, for example, this is where we get really uncomfortable with video gaming, where, you sort of like get callous to the number of people that you run down in some of these games. Like think of Grand Auto Theft, for example, where dehumanization is just sort of normal in that thing. And the person kind of gets off on the thrill of being how awful can they really be. Then there is people who just don't see people as human. This number nine is dehumanization. That they think of wartime. When there's a big army moving through an area and they're picking everything off for themselves, all the food, and they're leaving like nothing behind. And often there's a lot of not only pillaging, but there's also a lot of other things, crimes against humanity that are happening to the women and children. So they just don't see that group of people as human, and as a result, it's easier to justify the pain. There's also because of narcissistic supply, and I know those of you who have been following me know that this is a big area of my expertise, that there are some people who just like the sadism as a way to reinforce their superiority, and they really get a boost from humiliating other people. I saw this happen with my ex. My ex, by the way, was very sadistic. In fact, when I talked about this on the podcast a couple weeks ago, it was last week's podcast, I got really triggered filming that podcast because it just reminded me the sheer amount of subtle sadism that I experienced in that relationship. But he found humiliating other people really boosted his self-esteem. So we were getting a condo built, and in the living room, there weren't enough outlets. So you literally couldn't plug in your phone near where you were sitting in the couch. So he had the building developer sit down in our living room and say, okay, what's wrong here? And the developer knew it was a setup. You could feel the tension rising in the room. And the developer's getting kind of edgy and looking around and thinking, ooh, I'm supposed to say something, but I don't know what I'm supposed to say. And he says, okay, now imagine you're going to plug in your cell phone. Again, he was like delaying this out, like prolonging it. And this guy is under, like, I'm watching and other people are watching. So it was a public display. It was so uncomfortable. He said, so where are you going to plug in your phone? And the developer is like, now I can almost see him slouching in his chair, wishing he could hide. His face is getting flushed. I mean, obviously this guy is distressed. And my ex was unfazed. He said, that's the problem here. There's no outlet. You need to put an outlet here. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I just wanted to crawl in under the floor right there. It was so awful. So there are types of narcissists who just really enjoy boosting their ego at the expense of other people. And then there are people, and this is the last one I want to get into, is just out of revenge and resentment. They feel justified. Now, here's the part that throws us. Most of us in our heads say, okay, if you do this, that justifies that form of revenge. And if you do that, that justifies this form of revenge. But what we get wrong is that it doesn't, people's like metrics of what is harming to them may not be your metrics. So you may think, hey, I just forgot a date that was important to them. And you may not realize to them that was like catastrophic, that you just destroyed them. And in their minds, now anything goes as a way to get back at you. So be very careful not to think that what you did isn't that big of a narcissistic wound or a big enough of an ego injury, because you're using your sanity, your metrics of what civility is and normal behavior. And please know that there are lots of people who have really strange views of what's insulting and what's not. I mean, how many times have we seen where like two celebrities meet, and because the one celebrity doesn't say the right kind of like hospitality words like greeting, the other celebrity has a forever vendetta against that person. And we think like, really, it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was a big deal to that person. So just be careful not to apply your sense of what's right and wrong, your sense of what deserves justice and what doesn't, which makes it kind of scary. I know it's uncomfortable to think that we may not always know other people's idea of what's insulting, but it doesn't mean that they may not be holding a grudge against you. So what does sadism look like in a toxic relationship? Let's get into that, and then I want to talk about what to do if you think you're in a sadistic relationship, and then we're going to jump into your questions, which I'll take about this or any topic. So anything that you guys want to ask about, whether it's sadism or something else. Okay, so what is sadism in a relationship? Here's some examples, and I have quite a few of them. I've got 10 of them. Actually, I've got a lot of them. I want to cover them by physical sadism, emotional sadism, verbal sadism, as well as passive-aggressive sexual sadism, intellectual sadism, financial sadism, and social sadism, and interpersonal. So I have a lot. So hang on, guys. We're going to move through this really fast because I want to cover all these topics. So here's some examples of physical sadism. It's when somebody physically harms, controls, or intimidates you. Here's some examples: pushing, punching, grabbing, playfully hurting you just enough to cause discomfort, but not enough to cause visible marks, and then laughing it off. Blocking someone or physically restraining them during an argument to assert dominance. Deliberately pushing someone's physical limits, like making them eat something too spicy or encouraging them to overdrink just to see them struggle. So those are some examples of physical sadism. It's physically harming, controlling, or intimidating another person. All right, emotional sadism. That's inflicting psychological distress, humiliation, or manipulation to elicit an emotional reaction. Here's 3 examples: smiling or showing pleasure when you're crying or deeply upset. Example number 2, embarrassing your partner, embarrassing you in a social situation, like bringing up an insecurity or a past mistake in a lighthearted tone. Number 3, ignoring your pain deliberately while enjoying it, actually enjoying it while pretending to be indifferent. So they're actually enjoying your pain and suffering, but they're pretending to be indifferent. Okay, so that is emotional sadism. Verbal sadism, that's using words to inflict pain, to undermine you, or to humiliate you. So here's 3 examples: making cruel jokes or sarcastic remarks about your appearance or intelligence or your worth, and then dismissing it as, I was just teasing, or can't you take a joke? Example number 3, deliberately misinterpreting your words to make them sound ridiculous or unreasonable. Oh my goodness, how many of us experienced that one? Number 3, gaslighting by twisting the facts to make you doubt your own memory or perception while enjoying the confusion that it causes you. Okay, so that's verbal sadism. Here's passive aggressive sadism. It's inflicting pain or distress in an indirect way while maintaining plausible deniability. Example number 1, forgetting to do something important they promised, especially when it puts you in a very difficult position. Number 2, giving the silent treatment with an air of smug satisfaction, watching your distress grow. Number 3, withholding affection or small acts of kindness on purpose just to make your partner feel undeserving. How are you guys doing? This is tough stuff. I know that I'm being triggered and memories are flooding. So maybe we all need to take a deep breath for a minute. We're kind of halfway through. Okay, we're going to be okay. Let's be okay. All right. Yes, this is very triggering. I agree, Tina. It's very triggering. Number 5, sexual sadism. Hold on, guys. This is a hard one. Deriving pleasure from humiliating, controlling, inflicting distress in a sexual context and non-consensually. That's the important part, non-consensually. Here's some examples. Pressuring you into sex after having an argument and using intimacy as a way to dominate instead of connect. Number 2, making degrading comments during intimacy that they know will make you feel uncomfortable or humiliated. Number 3, withholding physical affection as punishment, making their partner beg for touch or closeness. My partner loved to do that one. He would withhold contact with me for long periods of time until I was pretty much a mess. Yeah, I felt very undid by that. I know a lot of men complain about it, but actually I experienced sexual withholding, and it was really, really painful. Okay, number 6, intellectual sadism. Using knowledge, logic, or debate to humiliate, manipulate, or assert dominance over others. Here's some examples. Number 1, deliberately arguing in a convoluted way just to frustrate the partner and make you feel stupid. Number 2, constantly correcting minor mistakes with a condescending tone to make you feel inferior. Number 3, bringing up obscure facts or research to win discussions, even in situations where it's irrelevant, just to show off their superiority. How many of us have seen that in a classroom with a very toxic professor? In fact, there was a professor I got to watch that he would call on someone that he knew didn't know the answer just to put them down and show them up and show how little they knew at the public display for the whole college room, the whole room. I refused to take the guy as a professor. I wouldn't take his classes. I would rather find another way to get that credit than to sit in that class, because I was not going to be a party to that. It just was way too uncomfortable to me. I mean, like I said, I grew up with it. I didn't need to put myself deliberately under that kind of experience financially, and pay for it. I didn't want that kind of experience. All right, financial sadism, using money or financial control to inflict distress. Example number 1, deliberately making you feel guilty for spending money on your basic needs while they indulge themselves. How many of you guys have heard Rose's roller coaster of love story about how her partner would go out and do something illegal, blow a lot of money on something illegal while he got on her for her Starbucks. In fact, she's made some content about that. That would be an example of financial sadism. Example number 2, withholding financial support as punishment, such as refusing to pay for an agreed upon expense after an argument, like just taking it right off the board as a way to hurt you. Example number 3, secretly running up a debt in both of your names to create long-term financial hardship and control. I heard of on the Betrayal Weekly, one of the stories was a young lady whose parents approved of her going to an expensive school and take out loans so she could pay for it because the family couldn't afford it. When she got all said and done, she found out the family had actually taken additional loans and lived on it and racked up a massive bill that's going to take her much of her life to pay off. Wow, I was horrified by that story. So that's financial sadism. Social sadism, deriving pleasure from isolating, humiliating, or manipulating social dynamics to hurt you, such as, example number 1, spreading subtle rumors or making concerned comments that cast doubt on your reputation. Number 2, ignoring you in public while lavishing attention on others just to make you feel insignificant. Number 3, encouraging friends or families to take sides against you in a conflict while enjoying the power imbalance. Yeah, I saw that. My dad My grandmother used to deliberately get my dad to side against my mom and then try to get the rest of us to do that, to weigh in against her. And I just knew it was hurtful. I just knew that they were doing it a way to really, really punish her and make her feel bad. And it sickened me. I couldn't stand it. Okay, this is the last one. Relationship or interpersonal sadism. Finding pleasure in causing distress through power dynamics of close relationships. I know that's kind of vague, so maybe the examples will help us clear it up. Giving your partner small, impossible tests of loyalty and love, and then punishing them for failing. Number two, breaking trust on promise or breaking trust on purpose, like flirting with others just to enjoy your partner's insecurity and reaction. And number three, alternating between kindness and cruelty to keep your partner on edge and emotionally dependent. Mine would do that. I don't know if you guys read the book Love You More, but in the book, I share how we were having the second polygraph, and it was to see if he'd been cheating. Now, I think the guy knew how to blow to fail, he knew how to pass a polygraph when he was failing it. He should have failed, but he was passing. Anyway, one of the questions was a super loaded question. And the question was, did he marry me for the money? Because I was sponsoring our whole lifestyle and investing everything. And so he threatened to take half of the money. So apparently he was looking for the money. Anyway, that was one of the questions. It enraged him. He got so infuriated that while we waited for him to take that polygraph, which is awful, because I don't know if everybody does this, which I hated. I tried to say, let's not do this. They would make me say the questions in front of him. Then we'd have to wait for the examiner to get ready. Then they would take him back to the exam room to take the exam while I waited to hear what the results were. So I didn't want to. I was scared, just scared to death. I said all the questions in front of him. I knew the last question was going to really enrage him. We go back to the waiting room. I'm sitting alone with this guy. What is he going to do to me? And I hear he's absolutely silent, and I hear him starting to pull something out. And I look over and he hands me all the credit cards and says, I won't be needing these anymore. Meaning we're done. The relationship's over. So he goes back and he takes the exam. They then we all go in the main room of the office to hear the results, and they say he passes. And I'm like, I don't know what to feel. I don't know whether we're okay now or we're not okay because I did the horrible thing of asking that question. So I'm on just tenterhooks. I'm just like scared shitless with this guy, because there is a part of him that really, really frightened me. I don't even know how to explain the degree of fear I felt around him. I was struck mute at times around him. We get in the car, we're heading back to the airport, and it's absolutely silent in the car, absolute silence. And then he says something. He said, I just realized something. And I'm like, okay. I'm not saying anything, because anything I say may be the wrong thing. And he said, I just realized that how I'm feeling right now is how you feel a lot around me. And I burst into tears. Why? Because it was so tender. Here I'd gone from this horrifically tense, scary moment where I thought he might even get violent, to suddenly he says this really super compassionate thing that connects powerfully with me. And I'm like, so you see how that hot cold was? How he went from kind to cruel, where I went from on edge to then. And did it do to me? Well, it made me more emotionally dependent. It made me think, oh, he finally gets it. Maybe we're going to be okay. Maybe this is going to all work out. But see, that was done deliberately to keep me on that razor edge of dependency with him. It is. I agree with your research. It is the ultimate mind F, ultimate. Okay, so, all right, maybe you've been listening to me and you're thinking, man, you're describing my relationship. There's a lot of this going on in my relationship. What should I do? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you can do if you spot narcissism or sadism in your relationship. I want you first to start to even spot it. Because that's the hard part, spotting it. I want you to start paying attention to how your partner reacts or your loved one reacts to when you're in pain. Do you notice that they get that's called duper's delight? Do you know what I mean? Where they get that little funny smirk like that. Yeah, I gotcha. I really like that. Do you see that? Watch out for that. Are they lighting up when you're struggling? Do you notice that they get calmer when you're distressed? Or they provoke you until you start to unravel, and then they stand back and then film it? All of that I'm describing. Or here's another one I'm going to say, because I know iffy to say, do they get turned on when you're in pain? Pay attention to these types of things, because that's one way to spot it. If you feel like something's off and the way that they react gets kind of creepy and makes you kind of feel like your skin's crawling, chances are what you're witnessing is a form of sadism. Second thing, I want you to stop explaining away the patterns. This is what I did for a long time. I would say, oh, it's been a bad day, or he had a really stressful week, or, he's just hungry, or things have been going well with him for his family or work or whatever it is. Stop explaining away the patterns, because if you're seeing this on multiple occasions, it's not just a one-time mistake. You're seeing who this person really is. You're seeing that the fact that this excites them, that they get off on that. So if you really start to stop excusing this, because it's not excusable. I want you then, here's another thing. I want you to test the boundaries in responses to test them to their, let me say it again. I want you to test their response to your boundaries. So for example, if you express discomfort about something, do they double down on the behavior? Or do they forget? Here's another way that it'll show up. They'll forget. You'll tell them, please don't do X, Y, Z. And then maybe a few days later, it happens again. And when you call them on it, they'll say, oh, I forgot. No, they didn't forget. They are doubling down and doing it again. They're justifying their bad behavior. So really pay attention to what happens when you set a boundary. Here's another thing that happens. So one of the things I do, and I'm wearing white. I love white. I love wearing white. But I spill stuff on my clothing all the time. It's a problem of mine, which I've really learned how to clean clothing quite well. I got some good secrets down that work really beautifully. But I told my ex that was one of my painful part of my history, is that I used to get teased as a kid for spilling stuff on my clothing. And I thought, I was trusting him with something that was kind of vulnerable and raw around him. And about a year into the marriage, or maybe it was even like 6-8 months into the marriage, he walked through the bedroom with a white shirt on, and where he had, oh, it's an autistic thing? Yeah, I think it is. It's that we have gross motor control problems. We're a little clumsy. That's one of our problems. But anyway, he walked through and he'd spilled ketchup on his white shirt, and he looked at it and kind of pulled it out and said, I have to be careful here. I'm going to become just like you. And I looked at him shocked, like horrified, because that was a tender story. And I know that if I ever used one of his tender stories against him, that it would have been like, ooh, it would have been very dangerous for me to do. So watch what they do around something like that, or around when you set a boundary with them. Number 4, I want you to listen to your body. I know we say this over and over and over, but if you feel uneasy, or something's like really off, or you just don't trust the situation, I want you to realize that your deeper part of your brain, the more animalistic, the more older part of your brain, near the brainstem, is very ancient, and it tends to pick up on things that our prefrontal cortex doesn't. In fact, it's the first part of the brain that knows information. So often there's a few nanosecond delay between the brainstem and the front of the brain, where they're trying to send signals forward. So often you'll feel something's off before you know something's wrong. So if you feel that kind of almost like your hair going up on the back of your neck, or you're getting goosebumps on your body, or just feeling that kind of creepy cold feeling, or just not right, that's your body saying there's danger here. So really, really pay attention to that. And I think that last part, and this is really the big part that I want to stress for all of us, is that, because I encounter it everywhere. I really do. I encountered it even on yesterday's podcast on the YouTube. I posted a comment everywhere but YouTube about it, but where we just don't want to believe in the darkness of other people. We want to pretend like there's not this awful shadow side to people, that people are really well-meaning and good intended, and that everybody's basically a good person. No, that's not true. It really is not true. There are people who are very dark and very sadistic, and they enjoy taking pleasure in hurting other people. Joe Navarro, in that interview that I did with him, you can find it on YouTube as well as my podcast. He's a former FBI profiler. He was a profiler and a special agent. He said in that interview, and I will not forget this, he said, there are people that if I got into their brain, I would not recognize them. That the degree of outrageous cruelty and darkness and evil in this person is unimaginable. So we need to know that just because someone looks good, I was just thinking recently about I don't know if how many of you read the book The Stranger Beside Me by Anne Rule. So Anne Rule is what, like a true crime writer. I don't know if she's still alive or not. Because she's been around for a while, but she actually knew and worked alongside of Ted Bundy. So she wrote about him. She wrote, that's what the book is about. The Stranger Beside Me is about Ted Bundy. And because what she's referring to is that they both served on a suicide hotline together. And she liked him. She thought he was a good guy. A lot of people thought Ted Bundy was a good guy. So really be careful that just because someone appears polite and nice and does good thing and maybe even serves on serves with charity in some format does not make them a good person, does not make them a healthy person. I think, for example, I don't know how many of you watched the Gabby Petito story, the documentary. I did watch it. It's shocking. I mean, it's horrifying, and that's a great example of Gabby had no idea that the person she fell in love with, Brian, that she fell in love with, was that kind of a person. I mean, and I agree. Everybody says, they seem so nice and they do the right thing and they walk the dog and they, even maybe find your cat for you or bring. If you met, for example, my great uncle, who was a terrible, scary person, he would do good things for people. Didn't mean he couldn't be kind to his neighbors, but boy, you did not want to live with him. It was extremely dangerous to be around the man. So please do not assume that society is a good place and that everybody's okay and that monsters look like what you see in Hollywood, because that is not the case. Monsters look like you and me. I remember, if you read my book Love You More, there's a scene in it that actually really happened. There was a moment where he was coming back and he wanted to like do a reboot with me, and I wanted to do a reboot so I can get my money, so get him out of the company, so I can reclaim all the money I've invested in this company. So he sat down with me and he said, "Oh, I'm in trouble and I need some help and I need you to help sponsor me and take care, I need you to kind of like help get me treatment," which I didn't know what that was about. I suspected there's a ploy and I didn't know what it was. So I'm kind of like, uh-huh-ing to him. And then I said to him, you know what? And I shouldn't have said this, but I said it anyway. I said to him, you know what? I used to think that you were a good guy who sometimes wore a monster mask. But what I realized is that you're a monster who sometimes wears a good guy mask. I watched him. He actually turned gray in front of me, started sweating. He had sweat break out on his forehead, and he whispered, "I'm glad you know." So, and guys, if you met him, you would have liked him. Truly. My family liked him. My friends liked him. Anybody who didn't know what was happening behind closed doors, they liked him. He was a really nice appearing guy. So please be aware that good people doesn't mean they're good people. You don't know what they're doing behind closed doors. You really, really don't. All right, so let's talk about your questions. What is it that you'd like to ask me today or talk about? Maybe on this topic, maybe not on the topic, but let's get into what it is that you would like to know about today. And I'm now going to start watching everywhere. I really haven't been watching, guys. So if you've asked a question up to now and I've totally acted like I didn't see it, it was because I didn't see it. So it makes it so hard because I love the abusive behavior. Oh yeah, that's a good point, BB. So BB on TikTok is saying what makes it so hard is that she liked the persona of the person that she was around when they were in public. But then, of course, when they were, privately, things would be really, really different. Yeah, I agree. It does make that really hard because they can be that public side can be really nice. I liked my ex public side too, for sure. So First Lady is asking, so how do we recognize the red flags early on? I think, this is a really hard one, First Lady. It's a very difficult thing to spot this, but here's some things to notice. How do they treat people, their underlings, when no one's watching? Pay attention to that. That's one way for you to sort of pick up on this. They will be, how do they treat animals? You'll notice that they have issues with animals. And also, just listen to your gut. Something will feel off. With me in the early part of the relationship, I recognized something didn't quite add up. I found myself doing a lot of research. I felt really activated around this person. And if you knew me, you'd know that I'm not normally an activated person. I just don't really, I'm a pretty trusting, almost gullible. In fact, that's what he said he loved about me was my gullibility, which is kind of embarrassing, but something bothered me enough that I would just do a lot of research behind, like, was he really married that many times, and was his wife's name that? I actually ran a background check. So that to see all the behavior that I was displaying that suggested that I didn't feel as safe as I thought I was. So notice that. I agree, BB. Another one is test them with the boundaries. Anybody who's toxic won't like boundary setting. They'll either blow it off, pretend that you didn't say it, forget about it, or they'll push back and act like you're being ridiculous for wanting that. But you'll get some kind of help for that. Sarah wants to know, how do you get a background check on somebody? I actually used a company, and it's called Stark and Pearson. And I found them online, and I really liked them. If you want to contact, get a hold of me at hello@Kerry McAvoy PhD. I'd be happy to share that contact with you. It's paid. I mean, you're going to pay some money to have this person do it. It's virtual. This person's not staking somebody out and trailing them. It's not that kind. It's just looking into, do they live where they say they lived? Do they have that number of people in the house? Is there any kind of like odd things in their past, or is their work record like legitimate? Those are things that you can do to find out. And it's not too expensive. It's a few $100s, but it's not cheap either. So please be aware of that. Oh, so yeah, Tina just weighed in on gullibility equals autism. Absolutely. The problem with autistic people, and I'm autistic, is that we take things at face value. So deception is really hard for me. Believe it or not, to lie for me feels painful. It's like uncomfortable. I don't like it. I have to like really override myself in an extreme way to do it, and like even do mental gymnastics. In the old days, before this relationship, it was extremely hard, like physically painful to do. So I just sort of assumed that in fact, if you meet me ever in person, you're going to find out I'm exactly the same that you see online, that what you see is what you get. I'm just sort of like, I'm like wood, I'm not veneer. So no matter how deep you scratch me, you're going to scratch the same. And unfortunately, I assume that about other people because of my literalness and my transparency. I just assume other people are literal and transparent as well. And unfortunately, they're not. In fact, I'm so excited. If you guys are aware on TikTok, I'm not for sure she's elsewhere. Her name is Linda I'm blocking on her name because she has a real name and she also has her handle. She's Bletcher. Her last name is Bletcher, and she is on TikTok. And she's going to be on the podcast talking about the differences between narcissism and autism, because right now it's become popular for narcissists to say they're not actually narcissists, they're actually autistic, and we just don't understand them. I'll tell you, as an autistic person, that's very insulting. There's nothing about me that's narcissistic. Black Bella is asking, is there a reliable online survey that you know of that can pre-screen people for autism? Yes, absolutely. So if you would like to be pre-screened for autism, there is a very reliable, it's actually a screening assessment. It's a professional screening assessment. How you get to it is go to aspietests.org. It's ASPIETESTS.org, aspietests.org, and it's called the RAD. It's I'm saying it wrong. RITVO, Adult Autistic Scale or something like that. So somebody probably will put this in the chat if you can't find it, but just look for aspietests.org. So over on Facebook, Kelly said, we were married for 36 years and I noticed some narcissism. He's addicted to gambling and he tossed me away as though we never met. That discard, I have to say, Kelly, is so painful, so painful. It's shocking how you can have this long history with somebody and they literally will act as if it didn't matter. And the problem with narcissism, I know I usually talk about that because today is a different kind of topic. It's on sadism. But the problem with narcissism is that narcissists see people as extensions of themselves. They don't see people as people. They see you as an object, literally like you're a tool on their tool belt. And for whatever reason, the supply this person was getting from you just cease to be important. Maybe they're getting supply elsewhere. And when that happens, they just discard you because you cease to have any value for them. Yeah, Renee, it's interesting that you call it an avoidant discard. That's an intriguing way to define it. I just see it as a discard. I don't see that as avoidant behavior. I just see it as dismissive, devaluing, and it's pretty typical for people who have a lot of narcissistic traits. Pretty typical. I don't know. Oh, I don't know why being truthful must be an autistic trait. It is actually, Teresa. I wouldn't say all autistic people are truthful. I just would say that a lot of us are literal. We're concrete and we're literal. But I wouldn't go out on a limb and say we're always truthful. That to me, that's a little bit of a stretch. Oh, Kelly, I'm so glad that you're here too, and I'm so sorry that you experienced it. Mine did a discard of me as well. Mine Actually, I was ready for it though. I hear that you were not ready for it. I actually wanted it to happen, so I was relieved, but mine left me when my son was dying of leukemia. How is that for? Like, sayonara. He actually walked out and said being around my son with leukemia was too painful and he was out of here. So, yeah, it's now if I had been deeply in the trauma bond and really, really invested and didn't see that coming, that would have destroyed me. That would have like literally, literally destroyed me. Thank you so much, guys, for your gifts on TikTok. I really appreciate that. I know you've been looking elsewhere because the camera is in front of me, so you have been getting a side view of me, and I apologize for that. I really need to find a way to attach a different kind of a handle to I think I'll do that when I get off this. Find a way to attach a handle to my computer screen so that the screen, you guys are right in front of me. I'm 10 months no contact. How do I keep it this way despite having a child with them? The people that I know who are really good at staying no contact despite co-parenting uses some form of parent like app, like Family Wizard, and they're just communicating about their child's issues through Family Wizard, and they don't interact with their ex, they're interacting with the app, and they kind of see it as that they're doing that as there's a way to stay no contact. Oh, Maria, thank you so much for the gift today. I really, really appreciate that. I know kind of technically, well, you are having contact, but in a way you really aren't. I think somebody else I knew actually hired somebody. They actually went out to Fiverr and hired a person to be the intermediary between her and her partner. So you could do that too. That's another way to but it's expensive. I mean, someone's going to have to pay for that. Yeah, what's the best way to stay positive after being destroyed? And yeah, and that word, I appreciate you using that word because it is a destruction for sure. They will make sure there's mutual mass destruction. If they can't make you lose and they win, they're going to make sure everybody loses in the process. I think the best way to stay positive is to know that you're not going to always be positive. I think to accept that you're going to have days where you are really sad, days that you're enraged, days that you feel hatred, days that you wish you could get even, that's all part of the healing process. To me, unhealthiness is getting stuck in the emotion, not experiencing the emotion, but getting stuck in it. I view it this way. I view it like, don't build a home in that emotion. Move through it. View it like you're on vacation, you're moving through it. Don't get impatient. The emotion's going to be there for a while, but also don't start to just embrace it either. Don't start to let it become you. Just see it as a stage that you're moving through as a way to heal. To me, that is the best way to deal with this, because if you start to say, I can't be angry, or it's wrong to feel hate, or I don't like being sad, what you're going to do is you're going to push those feelings underground and they're going to pop up and act out in other ways. You're going to start seeing yourself struggling with more addictive behavior, or you're going to burst into tears at the weirdest moments. So don't deny the feelings, just don't build a house in it. Don't make it your life. Don't find your identity in that feeling. So Franklin asks, if you're an extension of themselves and they abuse you, isn't the same of them abusing themselves and then hating themselves? That's a fascinating question. They don't see you as a direct extension of them. They see you as an extension of like a tool. That's why I use the tool in a toolkit. So for example, you have a relationship with your phone and it's an extension of you. But on the other hand, if that phone gets a cracked screen, you're okay, as long as you can afford it, going out and getting a new phone, right? You don't see that as like, oh my goodness, I lost my arm or my hand. You see it as I lost a tool or an implement that I'm going to go replace. It's the same. You're no more meaningful to them than an iPhone And if you like cease to serve their needs, they're going to go replace you with something better. Now, the question is it really better? We talk about that this week in the podcast, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. Why does our partner's life always look Instagram beautiful when they've left our life a devastated mess? So if you want to hear more about that, please check out the podcast, because Lisa and I really get into that topic. It's a very common thing that they do. But yeah, no, it's not like you're part of their arm or their body, because if they did, they'd take care of you better for sure. Very, very for sure. So Freddie said, my wife has an affair years ago. Recently she behaved and said things that made me feel like she's had another affair. And I asked her to download an app for me to monitor her phone and social media, and she's refused. Okay, so my guess, Freddie, is that your wife is doing something she's not supposed to do. If your gut, here's your first warning, your gut is saying something's off. You have that kind of interior flag to know that what it felt like before, and it's now being activated again. My suspicion is it's being activated for good reasons. And her refusal to understand your fear, be supportive of you, be apologetic and remorseful, to me is another huge red flag. This person has something not only to hide, but she is not regretful of the past dalliances. She feels entitled, because a person who loves you would do everything they can to make you feel safe and assured. And the fact she's unwilling to do that, to me, speaks volume. So I'm really sorry about that. That's very, very painful to see that. On Instagram, off topic for your phone camera, I use oh, yeah, that is off topic. Melinda, that really wasn't on the topic. When I felt those things, Nikki said, I pulled out my binder of all the things he did to me, and I'd feel my feelings and tell myself the truth. Oh, yeah. Somebody's talking about what's called euphoric recall, when we get kind of like positive feelings and we sort of get sentimental and start to like, well, maybe it wasn't that bad, and maybe I really, maybe I want them back. That's a great suggestion. I love that, Nikki, that you pulled out a binder where you kept all the things that he did to you. You had a running list, and then you'd let yourself experience what it felt like to read that list, and you'd say to yourself, that's the truth. This is a pattern. This is who this person is. Love it. That's such a great example, a great exercise. Freddie, I'm glad for your help. Actually, it's hard news. I'm sorry to have told you that, because I'm sure you wish that wasn't true, that you love your wife and you'd like things to work out. So I feel really bad that, unfortunately, that sort of, my gut is saying you're not safe, unfortunately. So I've got 3 more minutes. So let's maybe see how many more questions I can take really quick. Yeah, Betsy, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for that kind comment. I really appreciate that. I'm enjoying my singlehood too. I didn't know that I would enjoy being single. So somebody said I'm single and I really have been enjoying it. There's some freedom in that. I am finding sort of it's kind of embracing my power, finding my capacity. I've been starting to travel a little bit internationally alone, and it's not in alone, and traveling internationally and meeting people is really what I've been doing. So there's some strength in that. I agree with that. This sort of helps you. How else do they lure the next supply? Renee, they actually are pretty good at it, because we're attracted to the narcissist's confidence and their bravado, their charm. They tend to make really good first impressions. Think about why we voted for the current person. So they do well. They do well doing that. But the problem is they can't sustain it. So they're very good at making a sale, but they can't maintain a relationship. That's where they tend to lose it. Okay, this is a tough one. I'll take this as a last question, because this is going to really any advice on kids being alienated from you? Alienated from you. Sorry about that. Yeah, alienation is rough. Toxic people turn every relationship into a competition, and they put kids right in the center of it, and they want them to choose. You will help set the trap if you in any way act like it is a competition and you get anxious about it as a competition. Your best way through it is to not treat this like a competition, but rather find ways to support your kids no matter what. Even if they're angry and they're not talking to you, give gifts. Show up to the important events and sit in the back. Send them cards on their birthday. ask, send them notes and ask about things about their life. Know what's going on in their life. Like, pay attention, be aware of them. There's an example of I got from a child psychologist years ago about what it meant to be a really good parent, and I never forgotten that. He talks about learning to sort of follow our children. He used an example of ducks following behind a mother duck. They kind of like walk in row. But imagine yourself walking behind your children, taking their lead, being interested in the things that they're interested, asking questions about what they're doing. If you show up in a non-competitive, loving, supportive way over a long period of time, it's not going to be fast. This is not going to fix itself overnight or even in a week or maybe even in a year. This is going to take years of consistency. But if you show up as available, supportive, compassionate, loving, not judgmental, not putting them in an uncomfortable spot, over time, you will show them that you're a safe person. And when they start to get tired of their toxic parent, whether it's mother or father, and that toxic parent starts acting out with them, they'll know they'll have safe refuge with you. I know this is not easy. This is not for the faint of heart. This is a marathon run, and it's going to take a lot of patience and time and consistency. And I'm really sorry that you're going through it. I'm really sorry that happened to you. It's terribly wrong, but it is such a common problem with toxic and narcissistic people. All right, guys, next week, let me tell you what the topic's going to be because I've already picked it. And I'm super excited. I'll be back at Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we're going to be talking about when your new ex's new life looks better. So let's come together and talk about why toxic people have to leave your life a mess and seem to pick right up with theirs and make it look Instagram perfect. And I hope you also join me to watch this week's podcast, which is on the same topic. And then next week, I hope you'll tune into Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse because we're interviewing Chuck Derry. Do you guys know who Chuck Derry is? Chuck Derry is the co-founder of Gender Violence Institute. And do you remember that big list of reasons why men abuse? He had this massive list of what the real reasons men got abusive. So he's the one that did that study and found those results, which is startling. But I'm not going to just talk about, so in 2 weeks from now, I'll talk